Sports 910. Howard, before we get into this weekend's game, I want to take us back to last Sunday with the Detroit Lions, and just what is your biggest takeaway in that game? I know I'm putting you on the spot on this, but what was your biggest takeaway to why they didn't have a chance to win that game?
Yeah, good question. I think the biggest takeaway really was the inconsistency of the offense and not making plays when they had the opportunity to, and not being able to run the ball effectively. And that's really, guys, been the biggest thing in the two games that they've lost against Buffalo and Detroit. The running game just wasn't very good, and they had a real lack of, explosive plays of 10 yards or more. And so it affects getting first downs. I mean, and here's the thing, going into last week, the Cardinals were number one in the NFL. I realize only 2 weeks, but they were number one in the NFL on third down at over 58%. They were 1 for 9 in the game last week. And when you're not moving the chains, and when you're not doing that, you're keeping, your defense is back on the field. And they made their first third down of the game. And then they missed their last 8. And a bunch of them were manageable third downs, but they just weren't able to make those key plays when they had the opportunity. And heck, you didn't score many points. I mean, they did a nice job on defense in the second half, but you're not going to win too many games in this league scoring only 13 points.
I thought, Howard, the physicality aspect of the offensive line would have been able to match the physicality of the Detroit Lions. I was a little disappointed. I thought they'd built that up, but with Beachum out, Barton in the game, but I thought Barton did a good job. They did a good job protecting Murray, but they just could not match the physicality, which surprised me with this offensive line of the Cardinals.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's like, that was a big reason why they couldn't run. It's like, and it doesn't mean they weren't physical. I think sometimes we look at this from a narrow prism and say, well, they didn't match being physical. Well, I think they were physical, but they just couldn't open the holes, and they weren't able to break some runs. And that's a big thing. I mean, you look at Detroit and the way they ran the ball. Obviously, both running backs had big games, but they also had between Montgomery and Gibbs, they combined for 5 runs that totaled 76 yards. And so they weren't huge runs, like 30, 40 yarders, but they were 14, 16, somewhere in there. And those are big plays for an offense when you can move the ball. And the Cardinals just weren't able to make that happen in that game, whether it's physical, whether it's guys not reading the hole right, whether it's Detroit just being a really good team. And so I think all those things combined to create what happened.
And I will say this, I would have thought Drew Petzing might have taken a page out of the Rams offense against Detroit, when they had no running game in that Detroit game, that first game of the year, which Detroit went in overtime, just to kind of dink and duck it down the field. I think, Cooper Kupp had 20 catches. I thought he might have done that. I just was not impressed with any of the play calling in that second half, that he might have borrowed that page to at least get this team down the field.
Yeah, it's just, like you said, whether combination, play calling, execution. I mean, there were some plays there to be made, and they weren't able, to connect for whatever reason. It did seem like they felt like they could get down the field more with some, going down the field more. Like the big interception certainly wasn't a very good decision by Kyler Murray. And so, they didn't throw to the backs very much either. And so, I think all those things, it was just one of those games. But I think this, though, it shows that you can have all these things that we're pointing out of didn't work and this and that, and they're still right in the game at the very end against one of the better teams in the National Football League. So but bottom line is, we all know, close only counts. What do they say? And horseshoes and hand grenades.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's another 1-score loss. And right now, when you look at this team, 0-2 and 1-score losses this year, 2-5 last season, and so that's 2-7. You have to figure out a way for someone to make a play or not make a bad play to win some of these close games and make the plays when you really have to.
Howard Balzer is our guest on the Wright Toyota guest line. Howard, take me then to this Sunday. I think when the schedule comes out, they take a look at it, and they always
predict, okay, that's a win, that's a loss, that's a win. I think most Cardinal fans would have put in a W against the Washington Commanders. I think that's all changed now with what we saw the Commanders do at Cincinnati last weekend.
It shows the folly of trying to pick wins and losses in August or July, whenever it is, and that you have any clue where teams are going to be at certain points in the season. And it's not only that game. I mean, Jaden Daniels has been really good for all 3 games, and he's on a pace. I mean, he's had a passer rating of 90 or higher and completed 70% of his passes or more in each of his 3 games. And so, but I think it was overlooked a little bit with the week 1 loss, and then week 2, they had to settle 7 field goals, I think, but they still won the game.
2.
And they were moving the football; they just couldn't score touchdowns. But he's played very well, and he found a way to get Terry McLaurin back in the game, back in the offense, and with 2 big catches in that game against Cincinnati on Monday night. And they have a physical offensive line also. We'll see if they're affected at all, but they're not going to have Austin Eckler in this game. I mean, heck, you saw what he did. He only played 13 snaps, and he had a 62-yard kickoff return and a 24-yard touchdown run, had a couple of catches for 22 yards. He was pretty darn productive for only having 13 snaps, but he won't play. And so the Cardinals are obviously going to have some sort of plan, and, I don't think they have a turnover. The Commanders haven't punted since late in the Tampa Bay game in week 1.
Wow.
And so, the defense got to come up big. They've got to play in this game the way they did in the second half against the Lions. They still gave up plays when they could have gotten off the field and had a chance, at the end. But overall, the Lions didn't score any points in the second half. So I'm not saying you have to pitch a shutout in this game, but you better play good defense if you're going to have a chance.
Howard, I mean, the way this offense is going, the offensive coordinator for Washington may get a head coaching job down the road. I mean, he's really putting up some numbers. These OCs always, tend to have good years and then get a head coaching job the next year.
You think he's finally learned, Howard?
He's figuring it out.
Well,
30.
Not bad for a college offense.
Yeah.
And I've always thought, and I'm not saying there wasn't anything to be critical of or to analyze, but I think there's a lot of collective amnesia going on for those who just think that, Cliff Kingsbury was awful. And I mean, that team was humming, at certain points during his tenure, and what obviously affected a lot of stuff when when everybody would go for the lazy narrative. Well, he never was good, in the second half of games or the second half of seasons, right? Well, in those seasons here, I mean, there was the 1 year where they obviously got off to the great first half, and then you lose J.J. Watt, and you lose DeAndre Hopkins, and Murray's out for a few games, and Chase Edmonds and James Conner are both hurt at different times, and the offensive line was banged up. Rodney Hudson, this was a different team for the last 2 years of Cliff Kingsbury's tenure when Rodney Hudson was on the field and when he wasn't. And so this, but I just kind of chuckle when everybody has this, it's a college offense, it's simplistic and all that, and and all these things. And of course that all comes from people who have coordinated a lot of offenses in their lives. But the way I look at it is Dan Quinn certainly had a feeling of what he was getting when he felt that he wanted to hire Cliff Kingsbury as his offensive coordinator. And there was a couple of other teams in the NFL that were trying to do that also. So, the guy can coach offense, and anybody who doesn't believe that, I don't know what they're watching.
Howard, have a good week, man. Thanks for the time, as always.
My pleasure, guys. Take care.
That's Howard Balzer, USA Today Cards Wider. He's got a bunch of stories up there. You can follow him on Twitter at hbalzer721. Always appreciate his time as the Arizona Cardinals are favored by 3.5 in this game right now, and the over-under is 50.5 as the 2-1 Commanders will be at State Farm Stadium on Sunday. We'll come back. We'll get you updated on our State 48 Roofing It's Your Call question of the day, as we had 2 of them. 2 really good questions today. Well, one in particular that was only for Jimmy B because it has to do with the WNBA because he loves the WNBA. We'll have that for you next as Rockman